Well, Michelle, thanks for joining me today. I really wanted to, one, catch up with you and kind of see what's been going on with you and your journey in the to kind of the sports media, journalism landscape and all that. But also kind of talk about a little bit of how you incorporate communication in your roles and how that plays a role in your job as a host and a personality. And also kind of speaking a little bit to those prospective, TV personalities, sports journalists out there who might be kind of looking at, is this the right thing for me? And how might I go about kind of telling my story to find my opportunities and sort of, climb that media ladder, so to speak. So that's kind of the angle I'd like to take with you. But if you could, Michelle, tell us a little bit about, your entryway, your interest, how you got into this world of kind of broadcasting and journalism.
So I normally, when I answer this question, I start with my first job out of college, but because you were there for the absolute beginning, I'm going to start in college. So I went to University of San Diego, where they did not have a broadcast journalism program. They didn't even have journalism at all. So in order to do what I wanted to do, I had to find a way to practice and to learn. And so I went to the athletic department at University of San Diego, and I said, hey, do you guys have anyone doing your post-game interviews for the baseball team or for the basketball team? And they're like, oh, we've had one person do it one time, but if you want to go, it's an unpaid position, but you can kind of pick and choose whatever games you want to go to, and you can do post-game interviews, and we'll just put them up on the website. You'll just have to edit them and write a little graphic blurb and put it up. So that's what I did, which is where I met you, and you were very helpful. And I kind of just spent my weekends trying to think, okay, if this was my job, what would I want to ask? If I was a fan, what would I want to know? And so that's kind of helped me put together my reel in order to send it off after college to find a job. So I found a job in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is market 127 or 129. And I started in news. And then after a year, the weekend sports anchor left, and I transitioned into his job. And then after about 7 months of that, I got a job back in San Diego at Fox Sports San Diego, where I was a sideline reporter for the Padres, and I co-produced and hosted a weekly magazine-style show called Padres Point of View. Then after 2 years there, I got the lead sideline reporter job for the Tampa Bay Rays, moved there. After one season there, I got the lead sideline reporter job for the Houston Rockets. So then I moved to Houston. And I also did a lot of Astros coverage as well, pre and post game hosting their weekly show. And then after that contract was up, I chose to kind of bet on myself. And I moved to Nashville with my now husband, and I stayed there for about 2 months. And then I started working where I work now, which is Sportsnet New York, SNY. It's the Mets network. And I've been here, I was freelance for about 2 years, and now I'm full-time and have signed a long-term deal with them where I do a plethora of responsibilities at SNY.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure your journey to where you are, and it's certainly not going to stop here. You've got other plans, and I'm sure there's other things in the works down the road, but it sounds like that's probably a pretty common just trajectory or path, is kind of like finding those opportunities and being willing to just sort of move wherever the job is, right? Was that something for you that was kind of exciting, or did you feel reluctant to go to a place like Corpus Christi, Texas, which I'm sure you're like, I don't even know where this is, or it's kind of taking you like all over the country, literally. And what were your thoughts in just kind of following those opportunities?
So I'm an exception to the rule in the sense that I was going to do whatever it took. It didn't matter. I didn't have anyone holding me back. My parents were very supportive and, said, this is a very competitive industry. If you really want to do it, we'll support wherever you want to go. Did they want to visit me in Corpus Christi, Texas? Probably not a lot, considering they're from California and have a wonderful state of their own to live in. But not that Texas isn't great, but it's a small town and there was not a lot to do, but I met amazing people there and I don't regret it at all. When I was there, I was relatively unhappy because I I wasn't living the life of a 23-year-old the way that all my other friends in the Peace Corps or whatever else they were doing. They were traveling, they were starting their jobs, they're starting their lives, and I felt on an island. But I knew that the reason that I was there was to follow my passion and follow my dream. And so I did that. One thing that I always leave out when I tell people my path, and it sounds like I had this trajectory that just went straight up. I think a lot of people don't understand that careers go like this. And it may look like this on the internet because of my jobs, but I was a solo news anchor for 3 1-hour newscasts a day in San Diego during my Padres off season, for really no other reason other than the fact that there was no other sports team in San Diego and I didn't want to sit for 6 months. So I wanted to hone my skills and remember how to read off a prompter. And I had minored in political science and I wanted to continue learning. And so I did news, and I did a wedding show when I was living in Nashville. I flew to San Diego once a month for 6 months and did these shows that were on national television that was called I Do. And it was a lifestyle show that I had no business doing, but it was, again, just something kind of to keep me sharp. And I don't say no to almost anything ever. When someone offers me a part-time job, a freelance job, I almost always say yes, unless it's something that I really think is going to hurt my career, because it is important to always take any opportunity that's given to you. And for me, it was very easy because I knew what I wanted to do and I was passionate about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, as you were kind of, taking on all those different roles, and I think that's a really good mindset of just say yes. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll figure it out. I've never done this thing before, but I think that's something that a lot of us can probably remind ourselves of in different ways, and even not even professional, but even just kind of personal. Because you think about, I'm sure you could look back at roles where maybe you weren't pumped about it and you're like, I don't really want to do this, but I know it's going to help me grow and help me learn. And in hindsight, you're probably like, I'm really glad I did that because it gave me something, right? It gave me something along the way. But I'm curious, along all those different paths, you probably had kind of a vision for what you wanted to do. Is that fair to say? What was kind of, if you look back to you when you graduated, what year did you graduate? 2012? 14 from USD. You're still, like I said, you're still kind of working on that, but what was kind of your vision of what you wanted? And then how have you kind of gone about sort of, telling your story when you've been faced with, a potential job or an interview, an opportunity to sort of say, hey, I'm the one for this. And I'm the one who kind of, I know I can fill this role.
My vision's changed. When I was in college, I remember in 2013 sitting in my room in Pacific Beach and watching MLB Network and being like, man, I think it would be really cool to do what Heidi Watney does. She went to the University of San Diego. She somehow made it to MLB Network. I wonder if I could do that. And so I thought, MLB Network was the goal. And then I interned for Fox Sports San Diego, and I was like, oh my gosh, the goal is to be in San Diego and doing baseball. And then when I was 23 years old and got my dream job, I was like, this is my dream job and I'm super happy, but I can't stop here. I'm 23. And clearly, if I can get here at 23, there's a lot more to do. I've always believed in myself as it pertains to my career. There was nothing that was going to stop me. So many people were like, oh, it's so competitive, you're not going to make it. It's more competitive than Major League Baseball. There's just not that many roles. You have to be really good. It's super subjective. And all those people were right. But if there's a quote, I think it's John Krakauer, the author, boyhood dreams die hard and good sense be damned. It's so true. There's just nothing that was going to stand in my way. No guy was going to stand in my way. No family member was going to stand in my way. And when you ask how do I tell my story? I think the most important thing, and this is going to sound very cliche, but I think it's true, is to be authentic, because executives talk to people all day, every day, and they hear everything under the sun. And the only thing that's going to stand out that's going to be unique is something they haven't heard before. And the only thing they haven't heard before is someone's personal story. So you can't blow smoke when you're talking to these executives, because they've heard it all and they know what they're looking for almost exactly. And if you're trying to change their mind, you have to give them something that they didn't expect. So I've always tried to stay true to myself unapologetically. And sometimes that hurts me and sometimes that helps me. And I just have to trust that I'll be placed wherever I'm supposed to be placed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think also, like, it sounds like just that personal conviction of like, I want to do this, I'm going to do this at some level, that's going to come through, right? Directly or indirectly, when you're sitting in an interview or you're putting together, some version of a portfolio or something, is like just that thing of, there's no wavering of, should I be doing this? Is this the right thing for me? It's like, no, I'm going to do this, whether it's this role or not. And I'm sure that probably came through, as you did your different interviews with executives, producers, all that kind of stuff.
Well, when I chose not to renew my contract in Houston and I didn't have anything lined up, everyone thought I was crazy. I mean, everyone. My agent thought I was crazy. Executives at the highest level said, I don't know if I would do that. It's really hard to get back into the industry once you leave the industry. And there were times where I doubted if I would get back in. I mean, it wasn't out that long, but like, it's very competitive and it's very scary. It's like telling someone who played Major League Baseball, for 6 years, you're just going to not play. You're not going to talk to anyone in the industry. You're not going to practice. You're not, everyone else is getting better while you're sitting out. And then somehow they try out and get back in. Like it's very challenging. But I really, I believed that I could do it. And the timing of it was horrible because it was right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit and nobody was working and nobody was hiring. If anything, like all this amazing talent was being released and I had even more competition. But in a way it did help me as well, because we were kind of all on an even playing field again. But do you know who Adam Schefter is?
Yeah.
Adam Schefter was one of the gentlemen that I kind of really looked up to, who was mentoring me when I was trying to decide whether or not I should go back to my job in Houston. And he said, bet on yourself. Like, this is ridiculous. You like, if you think that, you want to try and go to New York or LA, then you should do that. You should do that. And I was like, okay, all it took was for one person to give me permission to be like, you do what you want to do. Whereas everyone else was like, you're crazy. There's thousands of girls that want this job, blah, blah, blah. But I knew in my heart that I didn't think it was the right thing to do, to stay. And so I left, and I'm as happy as I possibly could be, knock on wood, because I'm in the top market in the country, and I am now married when I was single throughout my entire career. So, it all works out.
And it doesn't hurt to have Shefty giving you advice either, So.
Yeah, but the people who were giving me advice on the opposing end were just as decorated, I guess.
Yeah.
So I just was looking for someone to tell me it was okay, because I thought it was okay and I knew it was okay. I mean, even my parents were like, you're crazy, Michelle. So they're wrong.
Yeah. Betting on yourself. I mean, that's a huge thing, I think, in any kind of career field or job or whatever it is. And you hear that a lot in the scope of sports, which is related to our context here. But, you hear about players kind of leaving a team and trying out free agency and betting on themselves. And it's not an easy thing. It's one of those things that sounds great, but when you're actually faced with that, you're like, oh crap, do I really think, I can do this?
Yeah. I think I'm very fortunate in the sense that I didn't have anything holding me back. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a family. I didn't need to be in a certain city. My dad is sick and he was in Sacramento, and he still said, go do what you like. He wanted me to not come home. Like, he was like, you do what you need to do. Like, that's what made him happy. So I'm fortunate in the sense that I didn't have anything weighing me down. If I was faced with 3 kids and I was the sole provider of my family, I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have stayed and it would have been fine. Listen, that's not a bad job at all. It just wasn't the end for me. And I felt like I was young and I wanted to go as far as I possibly could before I couldn't anymore, or before I decided that I didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And And it's good to see that it has paid off to this point, and it's given you sort of, you already had that confidence, but it's given you some of that confidence to kind of trust that if you're ever in that situation again, you've been through it, that you can navigate something like that and then take some of that risk.
Yes, but Adam, you have seen the videos from when I was at USD, and I didn't know what I was doing. My voice was so high. I was so annoying. It's like nails on a chalkboard. I just want YouTube to take off all the videos from USD because they're so bad.
How
It's
long, I'm curious, how long did you use some of that in your reel or your portfolio? And at what point were you like, all right, I got to scratch this stuff from
Probably just until I got to Corpus Christi, because I did so much in Corpus. I was in studio, I was reporting, I did news, I did sports, I did fun stuff in the mornings, and then I did serious stuff at night. Like, I think that replaced all of it. But I was still proud. Like, looking back, it's not like the questions that I was asking were terrible questions. I still was a journalist without even knowing that I was a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes innately, I think. I didn't, there might be a couple times where I asked you or Chris or Ted, like, hey, like, do you think I should ask this, or do you think I should ask this? But pretty much on my own, I was like, mm-hmm. Okay, this guy scored 30 points and this is what I'm going to ask. Mm-hmm. But just like presentation wise was subpar, just not
part
good.
of learning.
But I appreciate that you guys put me on that website.
No, I think back at our time at USD, and I actually genuinely really liked. I loved USD just as a kind of an organization, but I really liked working with you. And I know that you and Chris and Ted kind of had his side of it. He was kind of like, yeah, you guys just do your thing, which was actually kind of cool because it gave the three of us a lot of autonomy just to kind of create stuff. And, for you, I know you were doing the USD TV stuff, which was a different type of experience. But I know for you coming over to the athletic side, it was cool for all of us. And I kind of throw myself in the mix too, because it helped me as I was kind of helping you, right? Learn different things and kind of keep an eye on different stuff, and even stuff like the video production and editing and things. I know you took a lot of lead in that. And then I liked to kind of be able to learn things as you were doing stuff, or if you had an idea. So it kind of worked both ways, I think, in that. But that's kind of one of the things, it's I'm sure every reporter or even writer or anyone who does anything that's kind of creating a product looks back at their early work and is like, man, what was I doing? I think that's probably true of anybody. But as you look at it and you're like, well, I learned, I asked these questions, maybe they weren't the best questions, or as you said, my presentation or my delivery, you look back on it, but that's all. If you didn't have that experience, you'd never, learn from it. You'd never evolve and adjust. But
it's just cringy.
It's just cringy, and we can all say the same about so many different things, But I think it's good awareness to have. But definitely, it's all a stepping stone for us. But that was actually one of the things I was just kind of curious to hear about a little bit more is, as you've kind of gone through your progression here and you've had these different roles and not always just sports related, you've probably learned some things from the news side, or you talked about working on a TV show, right? But how have you kind of seen a few of your key, not just skills, but kind of characteristics, right? Kind of your, kind of how you present yourself. How have you kind of seen that change in some specific ways over your time in this field?
Oh my gosh. Everything is all interconnected. Everything: editing, writing, producing, shooting, social media, presentation, everything's similar. One story that stands out to me, I was the host of Padres Point of View in San Diego, and my boss at the time, Jeff Bile, love him, literally was invited to my wedding, gave me an opportunity. He's a great guy. He called me into his office after I had done a Memorial Day Padres POV episode, and I was standing in front of a national monument in San Diego, and he pulls me in his office and he said, he paused it and he goes, "What's wrong with this?" And I was like, "I wore a red dress. That was patriotic. I don't know." And he goes, no. Like, and then he like rewinded it, played it. He goes, what's wrong with this? And I was like, I don't know. And he said, not only are you smiling, but you said happy Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day weekend's not happy. And you're smiling, like you're in your sports mode. He was like, this is not a happy-go-lucky episode. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he was completely right. Knowing the tone of your story is so important. And I think, when I announced Trump's presidency on the network that I was working on during the Padres offseason, I wasn't happy-go-lucky the same way I'm talking about a guy whose, dad played in the major leagues and they shared a special moment, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that experience really helps because you are talking to a specific audience. But I think that is kind of a theme in life, like know your audience when you're talking. But that's one of the flaws that I have in terms of being so unapologetically, authentically myself, is that I don't change who I'm around. My bosses know the same me that my friends know. My husband's parents know the same me that my parents know. So I need to work on that personally, but I think that is, something that goes across the board in all industries.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Like knowing your audience is such a simple reminder, but like I was talking to somebody recently and we were talking about just like the idea of like read the room, right? Like understand kind of who you're talking to or what the context is or what the situation is. And that's true of, being an on-camera personality. That's true of writing something that goes out to the world. That's even true of just posting something on your social media feed, right? That's communication to the world that you still have to be aware of context and audience and the purpose of what you're doing. And when I was teaching, we used to always talk about with writing, we used to talk about this thing called the rhetorical triangle. Did you ever hear about that or learn about that?
Yeah, I could not repeat it back to you.
Anyway, so. It's the idea of, whatever kind of communication you are engaging in, whether you're writing something, you're giving a speech or, recording something, whatever, you think about your audience, you think about the context, and you think about the purpose, right? Those three things kind of go together and they all sort of interplay off each other. And so it kind of reminded me of what you were just talking about is like, of whether you're, doing a news report or you're just sitting there casually talking with bosses. Yes, you want to be authentic and you want to be yourself, but you also have to have awareness of, what's the situation here? If this is a serious meeting about, our business is struggling and our sales numbers are bad. Yeah. It's not a time to crack a joke about something, and that's simple, but it's also communication kind of reminder in a lot of different ways where your example you just said is like, you didn't even think anything of it, saying happy Memorial Day, and so it takes somebody to point that out. And so now you learn and you adjust and you kind of have that added sense of awareness, as you go.
No, but now it's a pet peeve of mine when people tweet happy Memorial Day weekend and they're out at the lake on a boat. I'm just like, oh my gosh, have some feel. Yeah. What are they thinking? I'm like, that was literally me 10 years ago. 8 years ago.
Yeah. No, I think, we can probably all raise our hands in some level of guilt for those types of things for sure. Yeah. I'm curious to hear, Michelle, a little bit about your, you talked about like your communication style, like you're very authentic and everything like that. I'm curious to hear about the other ways that you communicate in your roles. Like it's obvious that your main form of communication is standing on camera, delivering a story or a news or doing an interview or whatever it is. But what are the other forms of communication that you find yourself sort of engaging in week to week as part of your role? And how do you kind of shift between those different modes? How's your tone different? How's your strategies of communication kind of change among those different things that you have to do?
So when I mentioned being authentic as a flaw sometimes, this is a perfect question to encompass why I think that. If you're having a bad day and you are always having to be on, it's hard. And whether I'm reporting or in the studio. So for example, if I'm reporting, there's a lot of people that I'm coming in contact with before my day even begins. So when I pull into the, first of all, like I have a morning call or whatever with my producer, and whatever, I'm tired, nope, can't let it affect me. I'm on a call the same way, you're on a business call, but my day is not 8 hours. It's much longer than 8 hours. And then I drive to the ballpark. And as soon as I get to the ballpark, the parking person, hi, how are you? Oh, like, Michelle, like, oh, good game last night. I'm like, yeah, it was a great game. Francisco Lindor walked it off, blah, 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 whatever. I'm talking to them. Oh, like, so, you think, it's going to be chilly today. Yes, it is going to be chilly today. That's why I brought my jacket. Like, it's just a lot of conversations. Then you park, then you have to go through security. And then the security has the same conversation with you. Then you walk into the ballpark and the ushers have the same conversation with you. Like, I haven't even gotten to my spot to like sit down and do my work yet. So one thing that I think that I personally need to work on is the fact that I don't turn it on. It's hard for me to turn it on. I either am just myself and I'm in a good mood, or I'm myself and I'm just like not as in a good mood. So when you are on camera, I mean, this goes for anybody, but I think it's heightened when you're on camera because a lot of people know you and you don't know them. You constantly have to, I guess, send out good vibes in terms of your communication style. Smiling versus not smiling, looking up versus looking down. There's just so many different ways to communicate non-verbally that people pick up on. So that's something that's a little changed over time. And then same thing when you go into a studio, you're talking to the audio gentleman, you're talking to the person who's setting up the camera shot, you're talking to the lighting person, you're talking to the person at the cubicle next to you, you're talking to your producer for the 11 o'clock show, but then you're also talking to the coordinating producer, but then you're also talking to the graphics guy, you're talking to the stats guy. Like, there's just so many moving parts as any job would have. But in terms of you're not just communicating to the people that you're talking to who are watching the show.
As you were talking, I was curious, you touched on it a little bit, but the nonverbal communication too, right? Which especially is important for you because the camera's on you. And even if you're not talking, maybe you're holding the microphone to Francisco Lindor and he's answering a question, but you can't be just wandering off. Like, there's still that nonverbal of like showing engagement, or even just the simple part of reading something off a teleprompter, but you're not just reading the story like this and you have to have that personality, you have to smile or whatever it is for the tone that you want to set in that piece. But like, has that been a challenging thing to kind of learn and perfect, is sort of the nonverbal part of the whole being on camera?
So when you say that, the first thing that comes to mind is if I mess up or someone behind the scenes messes up. No one at home knows it's the person behind the scenes. No matter what, it's on you. Kind of like the manager of a baseball team. Like, if they do something right, they don't get applauded, but if they do something wrong, it's all their fault.
Right.
Same thing. So if the prompter's messed up, and I start reading the same story twice, or if I didn't know which camera I was supposed to look at because the floor director didn't tell me, whatever it is, it's on me. And so it's very hard to kind of like bounce back and keep poised. So if I mess up, and at the end of my read, I'm kind of like, instead of, it's those little things where I if I'm watching like a friend of mine on TV, I'm just like, oh, she's pissed, or like, whatever it is. One thing that's actually is a pet peeve of mine as well, is you mentioned like when you're going like this with Francisco Lindor, whatever. A lot of times I'll see reporters, they're not listening. They'll just kind of go before they even like give an answer to where you would be nodding. And that is a pet peeve of mine because it seems disingenuous. So you have to be careful of, even if you're trying to give nonverbal communication, like sometimes it backfires as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's because I noticed the same thing, and I'm not even a reporter, but as somebody who's like done interviews for written pieces and things like that, like I think about that when I watch, a sideline reporter or something like that. And I think about, man, that would have been a great follow-up question to what that person just said. But it seems like you weren't even thinking about that. You were just waiting for them to stop talking so you could ask your next like pre-created question or whatever. So I noticed that same thing too, is that skill, I guess, which probably takes some time. Because I imagine too, to be fair, when you're on camera, and we can rewind back to USD, I know you were nervous doing a lot of those little spots on camera, and it's totally understandable. And so a lot of it is you're just thinking like, okay, what's my next question, what's my next thing, or I don't want to look stupid. And so indirectly you're not always even listening genuinely to what the person is saying. But anyway, yeah, I do notice that as well. Is when I watch stuff, I'm kind of like, how much is this person actually listening to the responses versus just waiting to talk again, you know?
It's funny that you say that, because Connor Joe, who's now on the Rockies, he was on the Dodgers for a little bit. I think he might have been drafted by the Pirates, if I remember correctly, but he was a year younger than I was. And I remember thinking, oh, he's a freshman, or he was a sophomore, whatever it was. And I was like, oh, I got this. And for some reason, I completely forgot what I was going to ask him. And I had to like look down at my notebook, and I was like scarred that I had to do that. And there's no chance Connor remembers that now, like no chance. But still, like I was just at a Rockies game in April, and I still was just like, I hope Connor doesn't remember that from 10 years ago, because I'm so traumatized. Like, what if he thinks I'm a bad reporter now? Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I need to get over that. But sometimes though, people don't realize, like sometimes producers are telling you like to rap, or ask another question or whatever. Like a lot of it is on the fly, and sometimes producers will have you ask a specific question, and that either goes well for you or it backfires. So if it goes well, people are like, wow, great question, Michelle. I'm like, oh, well, I can't take credit for it because my producer told me to ask it. And then there's other times where they tell me to ask something and I get a horrible response, or it backfires, or I get attitude from the player or the coach, and I'm just like, that wasn't even me asking.
Right. Yeah. You want to be like, that wasn't my question.
Right. You have to be careful. Like, for example, the other day I was doing sideline for the Mets, and on the first day of every series, we sit with the manager, just the broadcasters, and it's completely off the record. It's just a meeting in his office, and we just kind of, what's the term that without cussing, shoot the breeze?
Shoot the breeze. Yeah.
Shoot the breeze.
Yeah.
And he specifically said that Eduardo Escobar was available to play that night. He had been hurt, or he had been dealing with some like nausea or something. And so he specifically said it in the meeting, and I was like, okay, blah, blah, blah. But then when it came time for his press conference on TV, the first question had to be, is Eduardo Escobar available to play tonight? So I asked, and I said, Eduardo Escobar not in the lineup tonight, but still not on the injured list. Is he available to play tonight? And the manager kind of looked at me like, do you not remember anything we just talked about? And then afterward, he answered it, politically, for everyone else that was in the press conference, because no one else knew. And then afterwards, I went up to him and I was like, I just want to let you know, I needed to ask that question so that we could air it. We could air your answer. And he was like, I figured, because there was no way that you would have asked that question right after asking it. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, and that's an opportunity where I was able to defend myself or like give a disclaimer, but a lot of times you can't. Yeah. So you just kind of have to take the hit sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And you talked about it a few times, is just that idea of like you as the on-camera person, like that's who everybody's going to blame or, kind of point to. And you do, every once in a while, you'll kind of see those viral clips of like a press conference question that goes wrong or gets like a really, really crazy response. And as you're pointing out, like you don't really know if that's the reporter's fault, or if maybe he or she was supposed to ask that, or if there was something else, maybe an exchange that sort of preceded that in the clubhouse or something, right? That, so we don't know that as just kind of the viewing audience,
And I think when you bring up communication and you say like nonverbal communication, there's so many things that go into that. What I wear, how I act, when I speak versus when I don't in a clubhouse, my social media, like there's so much. People, I mean, it's honestly crazy what you can communicate and convey to people without even speaking a word to them. Yeah. I remember as an intern, I was in college, I was at USD and I was interning for Fox Sports San Diego. And one of the former Padres, I definitely remember who it was, but I'm not going to say it. He was always like, he was known for being kind of an a-hole to the media. And I was just an intern. So I was just shadowing every day. Like I never, ever spoke to those guys, but I was in there every day and they all knew that I was there every day. And one of the guys walked past me and went, wearing flats again, and kept walking past. And I was like, I'm mortified. Like, all the reporters are wearing heels and I'm wearing flats, and I look young and I look like an intern and I look like I'm not here to be professional. Like, so now I wear heels all the time because of him.
Wow.
My back is killing me, but it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're
So
right though. And
every good.
that's, yeah, I mean, it's not a great way to kind of be taught that lesson, I guess you'd say. but it's valuable. Like, just the reminder of, like, how you present yourself does matter. And, like, even if you're not an on-camera personality, but you're in some other professional role and you give your presentation on, the marketing figures for the quarter, like, that matters, how you are delivering yourself and presenting yourself. And yeah, so one of those, you can probably add it to your list of like lessons in the kind of the sports media world there.
I could
But
go on and on about it, but I won't. But
oh,
yeah.
I'm sure. Well, I kind of wanted to be mindful of your time, but I'm curious, as you kind of, and I'm sure you've done versions of this in the past, but for people out there who might be kind of looking at what you do, right, and getting into this line of work, and you've provided some good insight and some advice during our conversation here already, but are there other things you could maybe point to, in terms of advice or little tips that you've learned along the way that might help, the next Michelle who's coming up through their, university and kind of doing their, learning the craft and all that, in terms of, what you've learned so far, what could you kind of instill in somebody else, or give them in terms of tips that would, maybe give them a little bit of some perspective on what to expect and how to kind of frame their, tell their story or frame their experience in terms, in this profession.
Well, I have no idea what I can tell them what to expect, because the evolution of this industry is constant. And even just the pandemic has expedited so much in terms of what people look for nowadays, the subjectivity of the hiring of talent. It's just insane. I think this goes for any job. And I was fortunate enough to kind of feel this way from the beginning. But, like, if you really want to do something, there's a way to do it. And I think, like, people are very, very, very afraid of being uncomfortable in life, not just in my industry or your industry. Like, people don't want to do the uncomfortable thing. And that is, there's two quotes. One is, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. And the other one, I believe, I want to say, oh, it's Brene Brown. You can have courage and you can have comfort, but you can't have both. So, like, I've always felt like comfort was the enemy of progress. And if people don't want to be uncomfortable, then, like, this is not the industry for you, because you are in constant discomfort. You're constantly being challenged. And if you're not, then you're not in a job that's going to take you very far. So get used to being uncomfortable. And one person that told me, because I don't like change, but Jeff Bile, the same gentleman that called me out for the Happy Memorial Day thing, he said one time, you have to be able to adapt. And I was like, yeah, I'm adaptable. And he's like, no, on the fly, you have to be able to adapt. Like, this is live TV and it's sports. So there is nothing that's ever going to go the way that you plan it. And he is totally right. I have never gone into a show and had it go the exact way that I thought. And I've done a lot of shows, 2 a day for years.
Yeah.
And it never goes the way that I wanted it to or that I planned for it to. And you just have to accept that. And that's hard.
Yeah.
I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. I think for people who like to be, obviously you need to be ultra prepared, in your role. But there's those type of people that are very sort of process or script oriented, right? And again, not just in a kind of a media role like you're in, but in any kind of, like, even as like a teacher, right? I know there's teachers you talk about adaptability, like that's definitely speaking my language as a teacher, is like, you can have your lesson all planned out. I'm going to do this activity and then this, and then we're going to do this thing. But like you said, it's like so often that doesn't happen. Like it doesn't go that way. You get kids that aren't paying attention, or they don't get this thing, or like, half the class that you thought was going to be there to participate in this thing isn't there. And so now you got to shift and be adaptable. And I'm sure too, there's so many ways that skill is applicable, like outside of the professional world, but just personally too, is like being able to adapt to kind of personal things that happen, or relationships or whatever. And that kind of is like a whole nother conversation. But I think that's something that is probably like a really important takeaway for a lot of people, is just, being flexible, being prepared, kind of knowing what you're doing, but then also, being ready, not just like able to, but being ready to kind of shift and pivot and all that kind of stuff, which is key to what you do, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I mean, it's really both when you're in the studio and sideline, but I think that people think like the studio shows are completely scripted, and sometimes they are, but it still doesn't go according to the script that you put in at the beginning of the show. But for sideline reporters, like, I cannot tell you, it's happened more times than it hasn't. I have gone and gotten stories, and I'll have 15 stories on my little menu, and then I have to pitch it to my producer throughout the game. Like, now that we're on the topic of Francisco Lindor, like if Francisco Lindor comes up, and he's in the on deck circle, I'm like, hey, I have this on Francisco Lindor and I have this on Francisco Lindor. Like, I maybe use 2 out of 15 a game. So like, you go through a lot of work, and being actually on TV is like 5 to 10% of your job, and everything else is the preparation that goes in it, and doing damage control after. So you really have to just be comfortable being uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, not always easy for a lot of people out there. But
like, no one likes it.
No, well, I mean, some people do. I mean, some people, like, it sounds like you're pretty
sociopaths.
What's that?
And those people are psychopaths.
I know, but some people like that, just kind of living in that, I don't know, that uncertainty of things that motivates them. Like, I'm not really like that. I definitely lean more towards like stability and comfort, but it's interesting. And as you were just talking about, like the preparation, again, kind of going back to our time together back in San Diego, like, you remember how much time you'd go down and you'd do an interview for like a minute, right? But how much time did we spend in that office, like editing, or even just thinking about the questions, or how are we going to post this, and how are we going to put all these things together? And so I think like you got a taste of that pretty early on, and it was very similar to like what we did just in our regular sports information roles of, you're gathering up all this stuff that goes into this little story that you post, or little social media clip or something like that. And that's kind of just the way it goes sometimes, but you take pride in it.
Well, the thing is, it's a competitive industry, so if you don't do it, someone else will. And that's, you constantly have a fire lit under you, because it's a competitive world, and for good reason. It's an amazing, I never feel like I'm working. Even when I'm studying, I don't feel like I'm working. I'm like excited to get to it. So I mean, I would highly recommend this industry to anybody, because I obviously love it. But a lot of people are like, yeah, I thought about like, maybe I'd want to be a sports reporter. I'm like, maybe you'd want to be a sports reporter. Like, are you ready to move to the middle of nowhere and like be in knees deep hurricane-like waters doing news for a year before you get there? Because if not, you don't want to do it. At some point, it's going to chew you up and spit you back out. At some point. So.
Well, Michelle, I think that's been awesome to hear your insight on it. It's been really interesting. It's good for me to catch up with you on a personal level, but also just to hear your professional insights. And people out there, can really, I think, gain a lot from what you've shared and your experience, and kind of seeing, all these different sides of it. And a lot of it's probably stuff that people don't really know, right? It's the old kind of weird saying of like, once you're doing it like you are, you kind of see how the sausage is made, right? That weird expression. It's like, there's a lot of things that people might have ideas about with the kind of the media industry that, some of your insight has hopefully giving them a little bit of insider as far as whether it's something they want to pursue or not. And if they do, this is what they've got to be prepared to kind of embark on. But well, Michelle, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for carving out the time and joining me. And we'll hopefully catch up soon. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was awesome to catch up as well.
All right. We'll talk to you later, Michelle.